everybody, welcome to my channel. My name is Alex and today I'm going to be bringing you some stats about my 2019 reads. So I read either 148 or 149 books in 2019. Goodreads says 2019, but it was counting a book that I DNF'd, so I think the actual count is 148, but regardless, I read a lot in the year of 2019 and I tried to keep up with the majority of the stats, and today I'm going to be talking about some of those with you. Now, I did not do the best job of keeping up with the stats as I was going throughout the year. I wound up having to catch up and try to finish filling out the stats at the end of the year for books that I read back in like September. So some of these stats, particularly the format that I consumed the book in, may not be completely accurate, but I think overall they do give a gist of where my reading kind of went in 2019. Now, before we get into the video, if you are new here and you have not already, be sure to go down and hit the subscribe button and the bell icon down below so that you never miss out on any of my content. And without further ado, let's get started. So as I go through these stats, I will put some charts up here so that you guys can see them as well. These are just some categories that I have been keeping up with. The spreadsheet that I use to keep track of my reads throughout the year 2019 is one that was created by a guy that I found on Twitter named Brock Roberts. He makes a new spreadsheet every single year and it's got pretty much every single stat that you could ever want. I personally am not using his spreadsheet again for 2020, not because I don't like it. I've really liked using his spreadsheets over the last couple of years, but I have found another spreadsheet that will help me keep track of some of the challenges that I'm completing throughout the year. So that's the only reason why I've switched. But if you are interested in Brock's spreadsheet, I will leave a link down below. Starting out with genres, my biggest genre by far was contemporary. More than 35% of the books that I read in the year 2019 were contemporary, which does not really surprise me at all. You guys should probably know by now that that is my favorite genre, and that combines both hard-hitting contemporary and soft, fluffy, cute, fun, chick lit kind of contemporary. So all that together, 35% of the books that I consumed in 2019. Coming in second is fantasy with 25% of the novels that I read in 2019, and that doesn't really surprise me either. I did get on a big fantasy kick, and it is a genre that I really enjoy. My third most read genre was mystery thriller, which is actually a little bit surprising to me. It had about 9% of the reads. I did find that I read quite a few mystery thrillers, but I didn't think that it would make up that much and be my third most read genre, but I am planning to hopefully dive into that genre a little bit more in 2020, so hopefully that percentage will be even bigger. And then fourth was historical fiction, which actually does kind of surprise me. I don't remember reading a whole lot of historical fiction in 2019, but apparently it made up 8 to 9% of my reading for 2019. Kind of going off of that, also my pages by genre is pretty much laid out exactly the same. This chart does not have percentages, but you can see how the pie is spread, that the majority of my pages were contemporary, second most was fantasy, so that does kind of line up with the number of books that I read in each genre. Now, moving on to format, this is actually surprising to me, but the majority of the books that I read in 2019 were consumed through audio. 33% of the books that I read this year were through audio, so that is 1/3 of all the books that I read I consumed only on audiobook. And I also have a chunk in this chart that is named multiple, so what that means is that I consumed the book in more than one format, whether that be the audiobook and the ebook, the audio and the physical, the ebook and the physical, you get the point. So a lot of what's in the multiple category is made up of audiobooks plus another one of the formats. So I actually consumed even more audio than you see on the chart, but still audio is the biggest, and that was surprising to me. Second to that is ebook. That one is not surprising. I did read a lot of ebooks in 2019. I made really good use of the Libby app from my library, as well as some e-arcs that I received throughout the year. Speaking of, uncorrected proofs, or the e-arcs that I received, made up about 3% of my reading, which, you know, hopefully that'll jump up in 2020, but that is where we sit. Least read was my graphic novels, which I think I only had 1 or 2 of those throughout the year. As far as length, overwhelmingly novel won out here. 94.6%, almost 95% of the books that I read throughout the year were novels. That does not surprise me at all. We also have a very small percentage for short stories and novellas. Another stat that does not surprise me at all is physical books versus digital books. Throughout the year of 2019, almost 83% of the books that I read were consumed digitally, so that is either through audiobook or through the ebook. That, again, does not surprise me at all. Being a busy work-at-home mom, I am on my phone a lot, and it's easiest for me to pick up a book on my phone, so that's why that digital category is so high. Another one that was not really surprising to me, the vast majority of the books that I read this year were between 300 and 399 pages. That is the length that I tend to want to stick to. I think it's the easiest for me to get through. I think that a book that's between 300 and 400 pages is long enough to be developed, but not so so short that it feels rushed, but not too long that it's overwhelming. That's the nice sweet spot for me, and I think it is for a lot of people. Hopefully in the year 2020, since I am planning to scale my reading back a little bit, hopefully there will be more longer books on the list, but we'll just have to see at the end of 2020. Another chart that kind of surprised me is the vast majority of the books that I read in 2019 were published in 2018. So I was catching up on a lot of more recent backlist titles. I did obviously have some throughout the decades. I do hope in 2020 to branch out a little bit more and read all throughout the 2000s and the 2010s. So again, we'll see where that goes. But in 2019, the majority of the books that I read were published in 2018. Now, this is one that's just funny to me. The publishers that I read from was completely all over the place. When I am looking at a new book to pick out, I don't pay any attention to the publisher. It honestly does not matter to me who published it. I'm not going to favor a book that is published by Penguin or HarperCollins over a book that's published by an indie publisher. It really does not matter to me. So we had a ton of different publishers all over the board. But it does look like that my biggest publisher was Little Brown at 5.4%. And after that was Harper Teen at 4.7%. This is another one where there was a definite winning category, and that is where I got my books from. More than 82% of the books that I read this year I got from the library. Again, that does not surprise me at all. I either picked it up at the physical library or I used my Libby app on my phone. Both of those are utilizing the library. That's something that I love to do it all the time, especially since I'm on a budget. I love using the library. My next biggest category there is actually ARCs. 4.8% of the books that I read this year are ARCs. In the grand scheme of things, that's not a huge number, but that being the second stat up there really does surprise me. And then kind of going off of that, between ARCs and books that I got from the library, over 95% of the books that I read this year, I got for free. There were only a very, very few books that I bought and read this year, and I did not count my Scribd subscription in with this, and I did read a few books off of Scribd, but still, even if I had counted those, the vast majority of the books that I read this year, I did get for free through my library or from a publisher as an ARC. As far as ratings, the majority of what I read in 2019 were 4-star reads. I do consider that to be a good rating. A 4-star for me is a book that I really enjoyed, and I will probably think back on it, but I don't think that it is perfect enough to receive a 5-star, but it's also not something that I'm going to forget anytime soon, which is what I give a 3-star. So 4 is in the middle, pretty good. I enjoyed it. I would recommend it. So I'm glad that the majority of the books that I read in 2019 received a 4 stars. I'm also glad to say that the next highest category was 5-star ratings. I read a ton of books that I really, really enjoyed this year. You guys will see in my favorites video, which is coming out on Saturday. It was really hard for me to narrow it down. Next, we have my books completed by month, and it looks like August was my most successful month. Again, kind of going off of that, my most successful month as far as page count was also August. Next, moving on to author gender, 75% of the books that I read in 2019 were written by women. So I think that is really cool. Again, that's not something that I particularly gravitate towards, or not consciously at least, but apparently I just really enjoy books written by women. So almost a quarter of the reads this year were written by male authors. I did have, I think, one novel that was written by a male and female author team, and I also had a novel that was written by a non-binary person. That is definitely one that I hope to branch out in 2020 and read more authors that are either non-binary or trans. This is one that I thought was interesting. The gender of the protagonists in my novels. Over 50%, about 54% of the novels that I read, their protagonists were female. And the other 2/4, about 25% had male protagonists and 25% had an ensemble protagonist. Next, we have age group. I'm not surprised to say that the majority of the books that I read in 2019 were YA. About 55% of the books that I read were YA, but I am surprised that adult is my next biggest category, which I figured that it would be, but I read about 34% adult books in 2019. I didn't think that the slice would be quite that big, but apparently I have been getting into more adult books lately, and I think that that trend is going to continue throughout 2020. Then we have the countries that the authors hail from, and again, I'm not surprised to say that the majority of the authors that I read this year are from the United States. The next biggest slice of the pie is the United Kingdom, which again, I am not that surprised to hear that. I did also have several other authors on here from Canada, Sweden, and Australia, and I believe one from China as well. It's just not showing up on the sheet because there was only one, so the percentage isn't that big. This is one that is interesting, and I will flat out say that this very well may be inaccurate because, again, since I had to catch up on so many stats from the end of the year and go back, I might not remember everything in these books, but from what I can remember, these are my stats as far as diversity in a book. So you can see there's a dark blue slice up here where the percentage is 19.8%, and my computer's not showing me what that actually is as far as diversity, but you can see that I did read a lot of diverse reads as far as race, LGBT aspects, and mental illness. Now again, this is one that I did not do the best job of keeping up with, and a lot of the Own Voices books, I did not peg them as Own Voices, I just put what their diversity actually was. But in the year 2020, I'm definitely going to be better about tracking my diversity because I want the vast majority of the books that I read to be diverse. On here, like I said, this might be inaccurate, but I have about 30% of my books that did not have any diversity at all, and I want that to go way, way, way down. I would ideally like my none category to be like 10% or less, so hopefully that will happen in 2020. Series versus standalones, about 65% of the books that I read in 2019 were standalones, and the rest were in series, either starting series or continuing them. Again, you guys know that one of my goals for the year of 2020 is to finish up some series that I have been reading, so hopefully this will be more even towards the end of the year. And as far as the series breakdown, it was actually more even than I thought it would be. So for the series that I started makes up about 40% of the series books that I read in 2019. Ongoing series, so not the first book in the series, but not the last, usually the second if it's a trilogy, that made up about 37% of this pie. And then about 24% of the books that I read in series were the completion. And this is also just one that I thought was interesting. The amount of books that I read that were set on Earth. About 84% of the books that I read in 2019 were set on Earth, or some part of it was set on Earth, or there is an Earth that exists. 10% of the books was a maybe. It doesn't really say. It might take place on Earth or it might not. And about 6% of the books are completely not on Earth. They're in a fantasy world or on some other random planet, universe, who knows. And just a few other quick number stats. These don't have a pie chart, but it's just straight up numbers. The number differs for this on Goodreads because it did count that book that I DNF'd, but for the actual count on here of the number of pages that I read for 2019, I read 54,449 pages in the year of 2019. And that averages out to about 368 pages per book. Again, I told you guys the vast majority of what I read was between 300 and 400 pages, so this makes sense to me. And this is another one that I thought was interesting, pages per day. So if you average out all the books that I read in a month and how many pages those were versus how long it took me to read each book, I read about 149 pages every day if you even it out. And that equals finishing a book about every 2 days, which again makes sense to me. I finished about 148 books in the year. There's 365 days. That's not quite half, but you get it. The shortest book that I read this year was The Grown Up by Gillian Flynn, which came in at 64 pages. And the longest book that I read this year, no surprise, was Kingdom of Ash by Sarah J. Maas, which came in at 984 pages. And I showed you guys the chart on my ratings, but I wanted to show you the exact numbers also. We learned that for my 4-star ratings, that was the majority of the books that I read in 2019. I gave 44 books 4 stars. But very, very close behind was my 5-star ratings at 41 books. I gave 41 books 5 stars in the year of 2019, which I think is incredible. And overall, if you average out all my stars versus the books that I read, my average rating was a 4.09. So I did have a really successful year in 2019 as far as enjoying the books that I was reading. I did want to also pop over here a chart of the author countries. Again, United States was the vast majority, followed by the UK. Then we had 5 authors that were from Canada. I had 4 books by an author from Sweden, but it was all the same author. Those were all by Frederick Bachman, but I did read 4 of his books in the year of 2019. Then I actually had 3 authors from Australia, which just thinking off the top of my head, I can only remember 1, but apparently it was 3. Then I had 1 book each from France, the Netherlands, Denmark, and China, and Singapore. So that is really it as far as the stats that I wanted to go over. If you guys are curious to see all the books that I read in 2019, I will leave a link to my Goodreads down in the description. It's always down there for you guys to check out, but I don't really want to go out and list all the 148 books that I read in 2019. I would if I had filmed this a little bit earlier, but I am kind of biting the bullet here, trying to get it out in time for you guys. So we're just gonna direct you to my Goodreads and you can go browse all the books that I read in 2019. Let me know your thoughts on today's video in the comments down below, and let me know a stat about your reading if you keep track of them, if you go as crazy as I do, if you just keep a couple things. I'm curious to see how you keep track of your reading. As always, if you enjoyed today's video, be sure to go down and give it a big thumbs up, as well as hitting the subscribe button and the bell icon down below so that you never miss out on any of my content. So until next time, bye!